Well, guys, after that, that just proves that the final two episodes of Fargo are going to be intense as hell. And, hey guys, it's Kevin for Fargo, Season 2, Episode 8's Loplop, and I was definitely looking forward to this episode after last week's episode. I was really interested in seeing what was going to happen in this episode because, of course, we didn't see Peggy or Ed, or really, we did see Ed, like, very briefly last week, but we didn't really see a lot of them last week, and, while last week focused a lot more on the Gerhardts, this episode was definitely more on Peggy and Ed, which I thought was great. Definitely one of the strongest episodes of the season. They've really answered almost all the questions we had in episode 6, which I definitely really loved, and they're very well thought out, I have to say. A lot of the things we thought were kind of like errors were actually very well thought out, and I definitely really enjoyed that. Let's get into this episode. Let me just say it off the bat. This episode was really funny, actually. I mean, it was really insane towards the end, but it was also very funny, and I've said before, Fargo really knows how to deal with dark humor and, with humor in dark situations, and this was a really great example of how they did that here. Let's just get in this episode. There's a lot to talk about in this episode, and, right away, we get this really batshit scene. Peggy's talking to some guy named Albert, who starts asking if she's actualized fully, and, basically, there's a whole exchange that has a lot to do with Peggy being the best Peggy she can be. It's a really interesting scene because you have no idea what this guy is talking about, and then Ed comes down the stairs, and you realize that there is no guy Albert actually there. She's been talking to Dodd the entire time. So yes, they do have Dodd held hostage for most of the episode. It's as funny as you can imagine, and basically Dodd's just trying to tell him, look, your wife is insane, that's all that's going on here, I had nothing to do with any of this, and, I thought that was very funny, just the very beginning, but it also shows how delusional Peggy really is. I mean, we've seen throughout the season, Peggy is pretty crazy, she really is, and this is a great example of that. So, he also says that Peggy's insane, but he's also trying to proclaim his innocence, which is bullshit, because Ed recognized him right away, and he knocks him out with one punch, which I thought was really awesome. I definitely really like seeing that, and I thought that was definitely, because, it just shows how Ed will do anything for Peggy, and I definitely really like seeing that. Now, the scene we get after this, so then Ed loads Dodd into the trunk of his own car, because he wants to be the one to, I guess, kidnap Ed. He wants to kidnap Dodd. He doesn't want Peggy to have to do all the work. So that's what happens with that. And then we get this really interesting scene here. I definitely want to talk about this. Remember that whole situation with Hank in episode 6 where he didn't go back to find Peggy? Well, we find out why in this episode, why he didn't go back to find her. Hank and Lou arrive to find the two henchmen in the basement. Thankfully, both these bad guys are dead because the knot that Hanzee gave Hank proves to be a bit much, and Lou calls an ambulance, and as Hank is being loaded in on a stretcher, he asks Lou not to tell Betsy. So that's why Hank didn't go back for Peggy, because he was on this stretcher. And I thought that was very smart the way they did that. Now, you know that Lou's obviously going to tell Betsy what's going on. Why wouldn't he? But just that little reveal, I mean, it didn't really seem like a big deal, but it was a genuine question. Why not go back in the house to look for Peggy? Why just let her escape like that? Now, that makes perfect sense why he'd do that. So the two vehicles pull away, leaving just enough light to see Hanzee waiting in the wings, and Hanzee was definitely probably the thing I was most looking forward to in this episode, because as we know, Hanzee's going after Peggy and Ed, and I definitely did not predict what he did in this episode to happen, because I thought it was very smart what he did here. He goes into the house to do his own investigating and spots the info about the Life Spring conference on the fridge, and you don't know if Peggy's actually planning to go to this seminar or if she's just trying to cover up what she's actually doing. I've said it all season, I really do feel Peggy just has this agenda that nobody knows about and that she wants no one to know about, and I think this is a very good example of that. There is a part of me that feels like Peggy does want to go to the seminar, though, because that's been her dream. She talked to Hank in that scene about all the things she could have had, and now she can't really have any of that now, and she really isn't going to go here. That she knows that she can't do this because that's not the life she has. If her life were simpler, then she could go there, but she's not. So while on the road, Peggy seems to be having some sort of revelation. She's trying to be actualized and, do what Albert, whoever that guy is, told her to do. And Ed seemed much more concerned about trading Dodd for freedom. And I like that they've been doing the split screens all season, but particularly in this scene, I thought it was really well done because of the fact that you see how the difference of opinion these two have. Just seeing Peggy just light up like this was great. I definitely loved seeing that. But then when Ed was just talking about trading Dodd, I thought was even funnier. So the two head to a cabin that belongs to Ed's uncle, and as soon as Ed opens the trunk, Dodd kicks him, but Peggy has a cattle prod and starts beating him with the cattle prod. We get some of the funniest scenes to come out of this show after this. This is just great stuff here. Ed ties Dodd up. Dodd promises that he's going to have fun taking Peggy apart. And I love seeing Dodd pretty much helpless this entire episode, because Dodd this entire episode is like, oh, I'm gonna beat you up, I'm gonna kill you, I'm gonna shoot you, and he's tied up for most of the episode, and Ed doesn't seem to agree, obviously because he's tied up. So once he's bound, Ed says that he's going up the road to make a call, and Peggy wonders what they will do if the Gerhardts don't want to do business, and he says then he will show them which parts of the flank steak, and you can definitely tell that he's just becoming stronger and stronger as he goes on. In fact, there were parts of this episode where he honestly reminded me of Lester in season 1. Because, Lester was kind of like the weenie, the guy that didn't really want to fight. And now, Ed was in that same role in the beginning of the season. Now he's just willing to fight whoever. So he then makes the first call, the one where Bear says to take a message, and Dodd tries to convince Peggy that he's not a bad guy, that she should trust him, but she didn't take kindly to him calling her a whore, because he calls her a whore, and he then promises to show her the back of his hand. She says that he needs to be civil, don't give backhands to girls, just don't do that, it's not a good idea, they'll probably slap you. Anyways, it's not right to, slap women in general, but just, that's not a very good threat, but I mean, yes, it's like the only thing that Dodd can do is pretty much hit her, but honestly, I thought this was great. And she says he needs to be civil, but he responds, obviously in a non-civil way. So Peggy then stabs Dodd in the chest with a kitchen knife, and it's not the type of wound that would kill someone like Dodd, but it definitely stings. He proceeds to call her a bitch, so she gives him another poke, and this was just great. I've said this season is very much like Quentin Tarantino. Probably the most Tarantino episode yet. I thought this was just great. The way that they were using all of this and not taking it too seriously, I just loved. So, although I will say Peggy was pretty creepy in these scenes, especially this next scene where she literally gets killer beans and she force feeds them to Dodd. The fact that Dodd wasn't dying in these things, I think was pretty incredible. And she's apologizing for hitting Ryan. Pretty much everything that has followed since, kind of like an apology. But you can tell she's not sincere about it. She obviously is really pissed at Dodd. He's getting on her nerves, and how can he not get on her nerves? I mean, after what Dodd's done, I don't understand how you can't be upset with him. So Ed walks in, sees the stab marks. Dodd seems to be trying to signal to Ed that Peggy is completely insane, that he should just leave her. And honestly, Dodd does bring up some valid points here, but you know that Ed's obviously not going to leave Peggy. You know that's just not going to happen. He's just too attached to her. And like I said, while I don't think Peggy really does care about Ed, I think that she probably will never leave him either. So she apologized for hitting Ryan. Pretty much everything that has followed. I just read this. So when he asks if she stabbed him, Peggy says no, and Dodd is whispering yes. And obviously, he's going to take Peggy's word over Dodd's. He's just not going to listen to anything that Dodd said. So, he says that Peggy just had to teach him some manners, and I thought that was pretty funny. So we then see Hanzee making a pit stop at a bar. Outside there's a sign that says, now this was very interesting. I don't know what this is about, but this is definitely something to think about, because I don't know what the hell this is trying to say. He makes the stop at a bar. He sees this sign, and it says, "Here we hang 22 Sioux Indians, May 25th, 1882. And right below it, there's a pile of puke, so you can imagine right away he is kind of, broken up inside. He doesn't know how to feel about this. I mean, this is his culture, and they're being defaced like this. And he asks for a water, but sees spit in the grass. Then he asks for tequila and information on the whereabouts of Ed and Peggy. The bartender then gives him crap, saying he doesn't want to serve a man who doesn't want to be an American. And Hanzee rambles off his Vietnamese resume and leaves. 3 men from the bar follow. As you can imagine, this wasn't a good idea. He shoots 2 of the 3 in the knee, and then goes back inside and kills the bartender. 2 cops arrive. Hanzee kills both before driving off, and that was just, this scene with Hanzee just killing everyone. What I love about this was him taking out his aggression for seeing the thing about the Sioux Falls Indians. Him not getting to actually do something about it. This was the way he got to do something about it. Like, you killed all of these Indians. I'm gonna kill you. I thought that was very badass of him to do that, and I love that. And I think it also really makes Hanzee a vulnerable character, because Hanzee has never really been a bad guy. He really isn't. Yes, he's kind of been the right-hand man for the Gerhardts, but he's never really been a bad guy, and I think this is a very good example of that. So after all this time, Dodd realizes that he needs to pee just out of nowhere, and Ed grabs this tea kettle, helps him out, and I thought this was really funny. The scene where Ed's just like, you have to pee or poop, I thought that was really great. He literally makes him go to the bathroom in the tea kettle. It's as funny as you can imagine, and it was so funny. And, meanwhile, the LifeSpring conference has begun, and Constance is there waiting to get romantic with Peggy. Unfortunately, Hanzee shows up and spoils the mood, and this is where things get awesome. The fact that Hanzee actually was going to take hostage of Constance. I honestly thought Constance was going to die. I mean, how can you stand a chance against Hanzee, who has proven himself to be a badass, who's proven himself to probably be one of the biggest badasses on the show? I mean, everyone's kind of a badass, but Hanzee definitely is one of the biggest ones. So Ed goes to make a second call to the Gerhardt house, but there's no answer. He buys a few items off into the convenience store, and I like seeing the old products in the convenience store, like the old hamburger helper, the old cereal. It just showed like how more simpler things were back then. I mean, we're so used to like the big ads in the cereal boxes, and these were a lot more simpler. There really weren't any like big logos or pictures on these boxes. It was simply just the hamburger helper. And I thought that was really cool the way we saw this, and it's really interesting the way they did that, and I think they've really paid tribute well to the 70s. So, he strikes up a conversation with the owner, Maynard Oltorf, and meanwhile, Peggy tries to call Constance to the hotel. Hanzee's listening in as Peggy tells Constance about a breakthrough and how she may not need the seminar after all, and however, Constance tells Peggy they need the seminar, or at least the course materials, otherwise Hanzee will no longer need Constance. So she's basically telling him that she's basically telling her, you gotta get over there, or Hanzee's gonna kill me. So later that night, Ed and Peggy are trying to sleep, but Dodd keeps staring at them. He's just staring them down. Again, what I love about Dodd is that he is basically doing whatever he can to intimidate them, but they're the stupidest things possible. I mean, him just staring at them, stabbing them like he does. Ed puts a pillowcase over Dodd's head. He needs his rest so he can call the Gerhardt house in the morning. Now, I thought these two were going to have sex, but then they didn't. Obviously, they're not going to. Then I'm like, well, why would they have sex after what we saw in the previous episodes? So Ed goes to make a call, but ends up calling Mike Milligan. Now, this is when we realize that this episode is actually non-linear, because the ending of last week's episode, of course, ended with Ed calling Mike. And here we realize why exactly Ed did that, and I thought that was very smart that we saw that here. We see the exact same conversation play out from last week, just in Ed's perspective. And you know it is the same conversation, because Mike's hands are bloody. He's holding the phone when he just killed the Undertaker, and I really love that. So Peggy is then getting wrapped up in a movie on TV, and she's so into it that she doesn't notice that Dodd is gone. Now, how he got out, we don't know. This is Dodd we're talking about. But basically, she's so invested in this TV. I will admit the movie was a bit filler. Like, they showed a lot more of it than they should. But I saw that as a Coen Brothers feel. Like, the Coen Brothers do what they want to do, and I think it's very well the way they showed that. I think it's just showing that, like, Peggy's getting so wrapped up with this. We're getting so wrapped up that we forgot what's going on. I think it definitely, that was intentional for them to show the full TV. So Mike does not want Dodd and is willing to make a deal, and Ed then asks Mike, he does want Dodd. He does not want Dodd. He does want Dodd, as we know from last week, and he's willing to make a deal. Ed then asks Mike to meet him in Sioux Falls the next day, which of course is gonna be the location of the upcoming massacre that's gonna take place. Now, when that's gonna happen is either this week or next week, but I'm not really sure. Technically, he wants to meet the Motor Hotel, where Candace is most likely dead. And of course, there's a slight problem because Dodd is on the loose and Hanzee's on the way. So first, though, he needs to stop at the convenience store to ask about Ed. And I knew that Hanzee was going to go there. I mean, the way that Hanzee knows what he's doing. He's very smart with this. So Maynard gives up the information because he's probably just so intimidated by Hanzee. He knows he has to say the truth. And right as Hanzee leaves, the guy picks up the paper, sees the story about the 2 dead cops with Hanzee's picture next to it, and he then calls the police, and you know this is going to be really bad what's going to happen to Hanzee here. I mean, Hanzee is probably going to go to jail for this, but he'll probably try to kill these policemen as well, which is definitely very interesting. And when Ed gets back to the cabin, he sees an empty chair. This is when the episode gets crazy. I know I haven't said too much about this episode, guys, but let me just tell you, this was definitely more of just like an antic sort of episode. This is really when it got amazing. Now, the episode was already amazing, but this is definitely when it got great here. This scene was both really funny, but also really crazy. We see Peggy's lifeless feet next to the bed, and I'm like, oh shit, please don't tell me that Peggy's dead. So he walks towards her. Dodd ropes Ed around the neck, pulls nice and tight, and I honestly thought Ed was gonna die here. I still can't believe that Ed's alive, and we're on episode 8. I honestly thought Ed was gonna die. Ed would be dead by now. I thought Peggy was gonna kill Ed, which she probably still will. I definitely do see Peggy killing Ed at least by the finale. I mean, we know that Ed's probably not gonna be alive after the finale, so Peggy, I think, is probably going to survive. I just see that happening. So Dodd then begins to lecture Ed about Peggy and women in general, and the points that Dodd is bringing up, yeah, they're very sexist, but I do understand what he's trying to say, that Peggy's not good enough for you, and that you just deserve someone better, and that Peggy isn't going to do anything for you. So Ed's face is turning beef red, his eyes are starting to bulge, and Peggy, luckily, is starting to wake up, and just as Dodd says, I think Satan is a woman, Peggy stabs him in the foot. She also breaks off the handle of the knife, so when he tries to pull it out, it slices his hand, and he pulls his foot upwards, and that was crazy when we saw that. I love the scene where Ed's just like, you gotta stop shooting so much. I thought that was just, he probably had the funniest line of the episode. You gotta stop shooting so much. Because, yeah, if Peggy would not have tortured Dodd so much, he probably would not have done this. Well, he probably would have anyway, but it would not have been as aggressive. So just in time for Peggy to knock him out with a fireplace poker, Peggy then cuts Ed down. He's surprisingly still alive. I was surprised that he was. And then Hanzee spots Dodd's car next to the cabin. He walks in, and I didn't know if Hanzee was going to get to Ed and Peggy. I thought he was going to be chased by the police, but no, Hanzee's right there. Ed and Peggy are tying up Dodd, who says, get me Yoda here. And, things are looking pretty bad for the couple, but first Hanzee asks Peggy for a haircut. Now, this is very interesting what he does. He doesn't want to kill her. He asks her for a haircut, and obviously this is the man that Dodd sent out. Dodd is expecting him to kill him. Dodd is expecting him to kill them, but Hanzee then kills Dodd. He literally shoots Dodd in the head. Now, why did Hanzee do this? I don't know. Like I said, Hanzee kind of has his own agenda. He doesn't listen to certain people because he knows what he wants to do. So Dodd starts calling him a half-breed, and a Mongolier, and that makes sense why he obviously killed him, because again, he thought of those pictures that he saw. He thought of the mistreatment of the Indians, and he's realizing that Dodd is treating him the exact same way, and that they really have moved on to society, and Peggy's really one of the first people to actually be kind to him. So Hanzee sits down saying he wants professional cuts. He says he's tired of this life, and this was a really sad scene here. Ed then notices Lou and Hank approaching the cabin. Literally, they're right there, and Hanzee stands up, fires a few shots through the window. Peggy stabs him in the neck, and that was crazy when she did that with scissors. Hanzee tries to shoot up Eddie, but he's out of bullets. He escapes out the back just as Hank and Lou bust through the front, and that's literally how the episode ends. And when that happened, I was like, yes, end there. That's the perfect time to end, and that's where it ended, and I thought that was just perfect. Overall, guys, this was a really amazing episode. I really love this episode overall. But like I said, the thing I liked the most about this episode was the comedy. I thought it was a really funny episode. Definitely probably the funniest of the bunch. I mean, there were just some really great lines here. That's why there wasn't too much to talk about, because while there was a lot happening, a lot of it was really silly. So I'm not really going to talk a lot about it, because a lot of the episode was just simply Peggy and Ed torturing Dodd in these ridiculous ways, but I thought was definitely very funny to watch. However, there's a lot to talk about, because the biggest question is, did Hanzee intentionally want Peggy to kill him? Because the way he says this, I'm tired of this life, I just kind of thought, his people are dead. There's really none of his people left. You know, everyone's given him shit all day. They've given him shit since he's arrived. He hasn't really gotten any nice treatment from anyone, and the one person that's going to treat him like an individual, Peggy and Ed, who are just nice people. Okay, Peggy's a crazy lady, but she is a pretty nice person, even though I think it's kind of fake. Even though, you know, she was nice to him, it is fake that she's not really that nice of a person. He was obviously fooled, but did he actually want to kill himself? I mean, that's the big question, because Peggy stabbed him in the neck. He didn't try to, he tried to shoot Ed, but he didn't try to kill her, and he was out of bullets, and then he escaped out the back. The police are definitely coming after him. Either way, I think Hanzee's toast. Hanzee is definitely going to die, and I think he's probably going to sacrifice himself. I definitely feel like Hanzee honestly did kind of want to die here. Very interesting here. So, I think that's very interesting, and I think he wanted to go out on his own terms before the cops could get him, because Hanzee knows the cops are going to be after him, obviously, because of what he did. He knows it's going to happen. Now, Hank and Lou, holy shit, this is going to be incredible. I mean, Lou promised Peggy and Ed that he would help them out, and since he's given them everything he could possibly give them, he's probably going to arrest them, they're probably going to go to jail, they're probably going to get out by next episode, but it's going to be really crazy to see what happens there. I have no idea what's going to happen. Definitely very interesting. Dodd is dead, guys. Dodd is finally dead, and perfect way for him to go out, really. Just Hanzee killing him like that. Honestly, I felt so happy for Hanzee. Hanzee, the thing I like about him is that he's not a main character, but he acts like a main character, and I think they did that very well in this episode. I like that we didn't see Floyd and any of the Gerhardts in this episode, because this really was Peggy and Ed's episode. Why is Peggy seeing these visions of this guy, Albert? Is she losing her mind? Is this someone she actually knew? Is she gonna make it to the seminar, or does she want to go to the seminar? That's the big question for you guys. Let me know what you guys thought of this episode. I overall really loved it. Definitely one of the strongest this season. I wish I could talk a bit more about it, but like I said, most of it was Peggy and Ed torturing Dodd and these really silly scenes, so I couldn't really say too much about it. But that's just my review. Hope you enjoy it. We'll see you guys in my next video, which will be for the first part of the Flash Arrow crossover, which I cannot wait for, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.